United States Department of Agriculture.
Recording this session, so if people join late, they can watch the recording to catch up. So before I begin, and actually, all right, before I begin, I just want to go over a couple housekeeping notes. Everyone, please remain muted throughout today's presentation. We do hope to have some time for questions and answers at the end, but you can just put your questions in the chat as we go, and we'll try to answer them as we can, or again, save them to the end. And like I said, this webinar will be recorded and shared later. All right, and so now I will get started by introducing myself. My name is Michael McCullough. I am the NAL team lead for digital data curation, and I have been part of the Ag Data Commons team here at the National Agricultural Library since 2020. And for those of you who don't know, the Ag Data Commons is USDA's scientific research data catalog and repository, and it's intended to provide public access to USDA-funded digital scientific research data. USDA launched the Ag Data Commons in 2014 in response to the 2013 White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP, Policy Memorandum for increasing access to the results of federally funded scientific research. And this memo is very commonly referred to as the Holdren Memo. USDA subsequently released a departmental regulation, public access to scholarly publications and digital scientific research data, to establish a policy for public access to scholarly publications and digital scientific research data assets. Now, the Holdren Memo from 2013 has since been superseded by a new OSTP policy memorandum, which was issued in 2022 and titled Ensuring Free, Immediate, and Equitable Access to Federally Funded Research. And that one is more commonly referred to as the Nelson Memo. That memo requires agencies to update public access policies by the end of calendar year 2025, and USDA is currently working on policy updates and plans to implement the new public access policies. So amid this environment of evolving public access policies and implementation plans, the National Agricultural Library recently migrated Ag Data Commons from an internally developed and operated catalog and repository platform to an institutional Figshare platform. And this migration project, actually started back in 2020 when we initiated an exhaustive requirements analysis and evaluation of alternatives to replace our custom platform with a hosted solution with embedded best management practices. And we selected Figshare because it met the vast majority of our business requirements and demonstrated sustainment through a growing user community, most particularly in the US federal sector. We finished the migration process in early 2024 and have begun operationalizing its use in our USDA research community. So today's webinar actually marks the official launch of Figshare for Ag Data Commons. And today we have with us Mark Connell, the Figshare founder and VP of Open Research for Digital Science, and Anna Van Gulik, Government and Funder Lead for Figshare. And now I will turn this meeting over to them. Anna?
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. So thank you for joining us today, everyone. And thank you to the USDA National Agricultural Library for organizing this event and for the invitation for us to present to you today. It's been a great opportunity for us at Figshare and Digital Science to work together with the USDA and NAL over the past couple of years to configure and implement the new Ag Data Commons repository. And we're excited to see it live with so much public research data in it to support public access to research. We're looking forward to telling you more about this resource and our work at Figshare today. So the first presenter you'll hear from today is Figshare's founder and VP of Open Research at our parent company, Digital Science, Dr. Mark Hannell, who will give us his perspective on the growth of open data over the past decade and the importance of open research for USDA and across research disciplines. My name is Anna Van Gulik, and I'm the Government and Funder Lead for North America at Figshare, where I primarily lead projects for U.S. federal agencies, funders, and nonprofits, including the USDA, as well as leading our Figshare review team. So for our agenda today, Mark will start us off with a look at the state of open data over time, as well as a snapshot of USDA's open data. And then I'll start by reintroducing some of the public access requirements that Michael just mentioned, and that will lead into the context of the Figshare repository functionality and some of the use cases for Ag Data Commons and for fair open data across the federal government. And with that, I will hand it over to Mark.
Thank you so much, Anna. Yep, I'm just checking I had unmuted myself, and I have. So thank you very much. I'm going to set the scene a little bit. I am very excited about where open data is in the world and the progress that has been made and the opportunity for open data. And I'll try and set the scene on why it's become so important and why there are various different stakeholders involved. I just wanted to start with a story that I often make the case for why are funders pushing. You're a researcher and you're saying, why do I have to do this? This is new. This is more stuff. There's many reasons: transparency, reproducibility. It's been paid for by the government. But I always like to make the case from the government side of things and the funder side of things that it is the biggest return on investment for research that's being funded at the moment. There is a lot of files being generated that are not being made openly available, and we could use those files to build on top of and move further faster with research. When we're looking to solve, some of the sustainable development goals, what can we do? What is the lower hanging fruit here? And one of the examples I always used is, you've got the Human Genome Project, and for every dollar that was invested into the Human Genome Project, $178 was returned to the US economy, and it was largely to do with the data and the infrastructure being made openly available, so people could build on top of it. And the other one I like to use is DeepMind, which DeepMind's product AlphaFold has solved protein folding, and the PDB, the Protein Data Bank, had lots of data made available, 200,000 data sets made available, which was the training model. And that cost about 20 billion over 50 years to build up that data set of 200 million, of 200,000. With AI, DeepMind has now scaled that up to 200 million. And that is I did the maths, an equivalent value of $20 trillion in savings. And so that's why I like to emphasize that that's a good return on investment for the funders. And if we want to look at impact as well, they won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for it yesterday. So there's also some good impact metrics as well. I myself was a researcher, and I started Figshare because I wanted to make my data available because I felt I wasn't getting credit for all of my research. I spent my weekend creating these files, and data can be anything. It can be spreadsheets, it can be videos. And in my case, I had a lot of videos of stem cells moving, and I wanted to get impact for it. So one of the things we've been doing at Figshare for the last 9 years now, we're in its 9th year, is something called the State of Open Data, where we survey researchers on their attitudes towards open data. It's the longest longitudinal survey of its kind. It's global. We partner with Springer Nature to get that bigger reach. Because it's Springer Nature, it's got a slightly more life sciences focus. And the data is obviously all made openly available. So in 2023, the Chinese Academy of Sciences took the data around Chinese researchers' respondents and wrote their own report built on top of it as well. The new one is coming out next month. So keep your eyes peeled because some of this stuff will be in there. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the idea of credit is a big one. So this has a good endpoint, everybody. There are lots of reasons why data is important. I think I've highlighted a few edge cases, a few big cases with the DeepMind stuff, but you still have the problem if you look at researchers' responses to, do you think researchers currently get sufficient credit for sharing their data? 2019, 2020, 21, 22, 23, nothing's really changed. No, I'm not getting enough credit for sharing my research data. And so a lot of it is the reasons why researchers share their data is because they have to, because the reasons I've explained. But we are going to come full circle, and I do think you will start getting credit for sharing your research data very shortly. I think with a progress like this, you have policy, and then you have mandate, and then you have compliance, and then you have measurement. And I think we're at the point now of measurement, and therefore we can make it so the funders can start looking at ways for rewarding good data practices. At the same time, Figshare itself does have citation counts on its infrastructure. So if you make your data available through the Ag Data Commons, you will see views, downloads, altmetric scores, where it's being picked up or by Wikipedia or on X or other social media sites or YouTube. But we can start to see some of these metrics, and we see that software gets the most citation per unit. And this is because software is well described. So if you are going to make your data available, please describe it well. A lot of software researchers will make their data available with a README so people can reuse it. I think that's the mindset that we want to get into for research data, more metadata, so it's more reusable so you can have more impact for your research. At the same time, support is not making its way to those who need it. Ag Data Commons is fantastic in that it has a support team of people who work at the organization who can help you and advise you. That's not true everywhere. So if you are looking to use Ag Data Commons, be aware that you have a fantastic resource that not everybody around the world has, and almost 3/4 of respondents have never received any support with making their data openly available. If we look at some of the reasons researchers are struggling or where they might need help, finding time. Everybody's busy. There's more and more demands on researchers. Finding time is always going to be a thing. Understanding what the data management policies are. So you'll hear a little bit more about that from Anna as we go along. Finding appropriate repositories for deposition of data is going down. You have the Ag Data Commons. Copyright and licensing of data is something that you should try and get your head around. I like to say as open as possible, as restricted as necessary. There are ways in which you can control the timing of the release and things like this and who has access, but it's try and make it as reusable as possible for the most impact. When we look at the survey, we see that a lot of researchers do rely upon publishers. Some rely on colleagues and supervisors, and a lot rely on the institutional library or research office. So there are different places where researchers are going to. I think the publisher one is a really interesting one because it kind of gives you this, it's almost an afterthought. You go to publish in a journal and they say, great, we'll accept the paper, but you need to make your data available as a policy. You might have institutional policies, you might have funder policies, but you also get publisher policies. And at that point, it's almost an afterthought. I need to get my data together. I'm sure you will get your data together, but it also means maybe you should start thinking about that earlier in the process so you're not rushing in order to get your papers out. We've also seen one size does not fit all. In the last year, we started looking at differences between countries, but we can also look at differences between funders and what have you. And so thinking about the country in which you are currently working, how supportive are you of the idea of a national mandate? And there's some disparity here, right? United States comes kind of middle of the list here. If you ask the question and tweak it slightly and say, should funders withhold funding from or penalize in other ways researchers who do not share their data, that it was mandated they do so at the grant application stage. There's a much higher United States here has jumped from 36 to 54. And I think that's because people, again, are aware that they are going to have to make their data available and they want an even playing field. If I'm going to have to make my data available, everyone should have to make their data available. And that is what is happening. We're also seeing a little bit of reticence in trending down in enthusiasm around open research and making data openly available. And I think that's related to that time effort that, previously it's very easy to say, I think open science is great. I think we should all do it. But when the rubber hits the road, the idea that it's taking up your time now, there is a little bit of caution there. I hope this is going to swing back round with some of the new stuff that we're seeing, because when we look at what are the motivations, citation of research papers is growing. It's the number one response. Funder requirement is highest in North America, but still less than citation of research papers. And if we look at this over time, we actually see that the citation of research papers is increasing rapidly. We also see that we have data now. If you make your data available in a repository like Ag Data Commons when you're publishing your paper, it's associated with a 25% increase in citations to the paper. That's a PLOS study on more than 500,000 papers. So you can get credit already, but I think more credit is coming down the road. And also, there's a concept of this FAIR principles: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. And so if you haven't heard of FAIR principles, don't worry. Only 37% of United States respondents had done, but you can see that there's differences in different countries. So some of your colleagues in different countries may not be as familiar with this idea of needing to make their data available and the reasons to do so as you are. So I mention this because that was a lot about what people say they're going to do, but what are people actually doing? And now we have the data to do this. As I mentioned, we have citation counts, but Chan Zuckerberg have funded an open data set, a data citation corpus that's looking at citations. And it allows us to now look and see how many papers are linked to data sets in a way that is non-proprietary. So anyone can build on top of this data. And this is important because we see things. The NIH now has an S-Index prize that is coming out that they're giving away in 2025, which is to try and find an S-Index which measures how well researchers are good data citizens. So policy, mandate, compliance, measurement, we now have the ways to measure. You can see that globally, everybody is doing this. There's some disparities between countries, but we are seeing that the number of papers with links to data sets is growing up exponentially. We can also look at different funders and see the effect of funder policies here. So Wellcome Trust in 2005 had this huge leap. You can see how different funder policies are working. And this is important for a few reasons. Not only is it important because now you can quantify this and you can see the return on investment and you can see whether researchers are doing what they said they're going to do and withhold their funding if they don't. But you can also see if a funder changes its policies, what detrimental effect that may have going forward as well. So we have transparency, we can hold people accountable, but we can also start looking at that reward metric as well. And so based on that data set, I wanted to pull up the number of USDA funded papers with a link to a data set that's got this fantastic growth. So it is already happening. If you have not started sharing your data, you may be behind some of your peers and it's time to start doing it now. One data set is not enough to trust everything on. So we started looking at 2 different data sources for the USDA, and we can see that they're very similar trends. So it's looking fantastic. I think the reward metrics are coming soon, and Anna will now talk you through how some of this applies directly to the USDA setup.
Great. Thank you, Mark. I will switch screens. Oops. All right. Are we good? Okay. Thank you.
I'm not sharing yet, Anna, if you're trying to share.
Not sharing? Oh. What have I done? This was the problem with switching slides. Sorry.
I can always pull up my slides if need be, but I think you'll be more comfortable sharing your slides, so take your time.
Yes. There we are. Oh, I didn't click the second phase.
There we go.
There we are.
Perfect.
All right, now we're seeing them. All right, small transition. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Mark, for getting us started with that big picture look. I will now bring it back to the USDA. And for anyone who joined a little late, I'll start with this context about the public access policies and open science at USDA. So, of course, I don't speak in any official capacity for the USDA, so I've borrowed their language a bit directly here. And so the USDA is committed to making all peer-reviewed scholarly publications and digital scientific research data arising from unclassified scientific research, supported either wholly or in part by the USDA, accessible to the public. And that's really what underlies the resources here, including listed here on this site, including PubAg for providing public access to scholarly publications, and Ag Data Commons as a catalog and a repository to provide public access to USDA-supported research data. This comes from a USDA departmental regulation that lays out the policy. And as Michael alluded to, there will be upcoming changes to this. I believe they're expected at the end of this year for implementation by the end of 2025. But in the current policy, publications must be made freely accessible through PubAg, and publicly accessible scientific research data must be cataloged in the Ag Data Commons repository. Additionally, you might note that authors are also required to use individual persistent identifiers, such as ORCID IDs. So that brings us to Ag Data Commons, which is the resource that we'll be focusing on today. So this is powered by Figshare, and it is both a data catalog and a repository. It provides public access in accordance with that policy. And it's the point of public access to create a catalog record when data is shared elsewhere, specifically when that data may be shared in a discipline-specific repository, which of course would be encouraged because it provides high-quality metadata that allows data to be discovered and most easily reused. However, it also functions as a repository. So it accepts raw and minimally processed digital data from research funded by the USDA, for which a subject or domain-specific repository is not available. So in this way, it provides a flexible and standards-compliant repository resource for any USDA-funded research data that does not have another home. It accepts a wide range of data types in this fashion, from tabular data to genomic sequences, although those may belong in a discipline-specific repository in some cases. Can also accept multimedia files, photos, videos, 3D renderings, as well as software and code. And Ag Data Commons is a freely available resource for USDA-funded researchers. And quite importantly, you have the support of the Ag Data Commons curation team and metadata librarian experts who will review your data sets when they are submitted to the repository, or your catalog entries, whichever it may be. I would encourage you to also review the guidance provided by USDA for Ag Data Commons. I won't be going step by step through the deposit processes or catalog record creation today, but they have excellent documentation here in their user guide. They outlined the eligibility requirements, including USDA funding and content types that are accepted, and have a step-by-step data submission manual that you can find here. So I wanted to highlight those resources for you. I believe they'll also be offering a training webinar from NAL later this year, so keep an eye out for that as well. Okay, so now how does Figshare come into this, and what is Figshare? I'm grateful to Mark and Michael for laying the groundwork here, but I'll back up even one step further. So Figshare was founded by Mark about 12 years ago. It's a cloud-based platform where researchers can preserve and share any research content, data, presentations, publications, software. We provide open access to all of this material. All of the metadata is licensed CC0 and is publicly available. Open licenses are for reuse, persistent identifiers, and open access via an API. We have a few different ways that we provide this service to the research community. So one is figshare.com, which is our freely available generalist repository that's available for individual researchers. Also, a few years ago, we launched Figshare Plus, which is similarly open to any researcher on an individual basis for sharing larger data sets over 20 gigabytes. We saw an increasing need for sharing very large data sets up into the terabytes, and so this platform allows us to do that. And then, of course, we have Figshare for Institutions, which is how we're supporting the USDA's Ag Data Commons. And this is an enterprise configured repository for research organizations. We support academic institutions, government agencies, publishers, and corporate entities with these customized repositories that meet their research sharing needs. So here's Ag Data Commons, and I want to walk you first through a few example use cases to see what they look like when they're published in the repository. So first, here's an example of a metadata record, or a catalog record, as we would call it here. So in this case, the files are stored elsewhere. This is the Rice Yearbook. It comes from the Economic Research Service. And so there's a full set of metadata here recorded in Ag Data Commons that describes the work. And then there's a persistent link out to where it lives. And this is a really important use case for Ag Data Commons. They want to make sure that all USDA-funded data, no matter where it's stored, is cataloged in the repository. I want to highlight a specific example of this that's quite important, which is the culture collection. So this is funded by the Agricultural Research Service. For many years, they have distributed microbial strains to researchers across the US and around the world. And this is an open data repository. So in this, many of the results of those cultures are then genetic data that are generated and that are shared in NCBI GenBank. And the culture collection then aggregates these. So here's the culture collection in Ag Data Commons. And since the data is genomics by nature, it lives in NCBI repositories, which is most appropriate for this type of data. But the metadata and the links to the NCBI landing pages are harvested from NCBI's bioproject by the Ag Data Commons. They're enhanced with admin metadata and gathered under the umbrella of this ARS culture collection group in Ag Data Commons. So this is one of the features of a Figshare repository, that you can have these groupings and collections within the repository. There have been more than 1,200 data sets that have been harvested from NCBI GenBank to capture the results of the culture collection in Ag Data Commons. And so this is a really good example of that cataloging record. So you can see there's at the top right, that catalog in Ag Data Commons, and then the same data set listed in NCBI. This allows for cross-domain data exposure, minimizes the need for duplication and manual metadata creation, but allows for public access compliance and broad discoverability in the appropriate subject-specific repositories. And this is an example of utilizing the implementation of Figshare to create those catalog records programmatically as well via the Figshare API based on information such as the funding source that's entered into NCBI and the capability of Figshare then to group these resources together. So I think I really wanted to highlight that example. Here are a couple of other examples. Here's one of a data set that was deposited. So here's the use of Ag Data Commons as a repository where someone has uploaded the data files. So rather than a link out, here you have files that are hosted. You can share one file or many files. You can zip them, and I'll show you actually we have a folder structure you can upload. So it can be one or many files per data set being sort of this landing page here that has a single DOI, a persistent identifier, and this metadata description to it. And I'll walk you through what that is a little bit more. Here's an example of the group structure. So here's the Long-Term Agro-Ecosystem Research Network, LTAR, and this is comprised of 18 subgroups organized by region. And so each of these can organize their research outputs into these subgroups so that they're easily browsed and discovered within the repository and catalog. Oh, yes, I wanted to highlight, I think those got a little out of order. I did want to highlight the citation button on each of these records, which is important because it shows you that DOI. And here you can see in the record of a data set that's been published in the repository, the DOI is specific to the USDA and to Ag Data Commons. And this is a data site DOI, which allows this research to be persistently discoverable, and also for it to be tracked and cited so that we can see the citations and the impact that Mark was showing of this published research. And then in order to make this work even more discoverable and also to meet all federal policies, data set records in Ag Data Commons are also harvested and made discoverable on data.gov. So here's an example of the same data set record that can be found by searching in data.gov, and you'll see it points back to the Ag Data Commons repository. We have an API endpoint that allows for harvesting of the Ag Data Commons repository to data.gov for this ongoing discoverability. So Ag Data Commons is part of this larger research community of Figshare organizations that rely on Figshare to help make the results of their research publicly available. This is a community that includes academic institutions. I'm showing here examples from Iowa State and Carnegie Mellon University. Also includes Virginia Tech, University of Arizona, many other US institutions, as well as funders. We work with NHLBI at the NIH, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, with publishers. Here's a portal for Nature Scientific Data, and nonprofit organizations. And I'm showing the example from Howard Hughes Medical Institute, Genelia Research Campus. And we have more than 100 organizations that use Figshare to power research repositories for their organizations to showcase their outputs. So this helps Ag Data Commons have a community that has common needs. It allows them to use the built-in features of Figshare that support fair data, community best practices and standards, and also to have a community of federal users as well. So we also, I'll show a few examples. We also support repositories for Department of Homeland Security, Environmental Protection Agency, and this helps inform the future development of Figshare based on these user needs and requirements. So Figshare is a configurable repository platform for organizations, and I wanted to highlight a few of the features that USDA is leveraging from this. One of them is groups that I just showed about showcasing different collections or subgroups of users within the repository. One is single sign-on, so using an authentication system that your organization already uses to create user accounts and log into them. Customizing the metadata is very important. USDA has a very rigorous set of metadata that they've implemented in the repository, and that is also reviewed by their curation team through the Figshare review module. We can support large file sizes, actually up to 5 terabytes, although check with the Ag Data Commons if they'd like you depositing 5 terabyte data sets. That is a lot, and you should probably consider if that would be reusable. We offer file preview of many types. So you saw the spreadsheet. We can have molecules spinning around and uploading of folder structures. There's a GitHub integration for both. So you can publish GitHub software and GitHub repositories to the repository. A Dimensions integration, our sister company Dimensions, which is a database of funding and scholarly work to list funding sources. ORCID for integrated with author user accounts as an individual author persistent identifier, which is required by the USDA and will probably be additional of these persistent identifiers required in the future with the new public access plan. An open API that allows for batch ingest, which is really important for the catalog record harvesting. The API supports both upload and download access to files and metadata openly for any work that has been published fully open access without an embargo or restriction on it. We can also track, USDA can also track metrics of reuse and attention at the repository level. Right now, their repository items have been viewed, I believe, more than 1.3 million times and downloaded more than 1 million times. So you can track that at the group level, the item level, track data citations. And then they've also recently implemented an integration with symplectic elements, I believe for USDA internal staff, to track research output in the repository. I'll highlight a few of these with snapshots as well. So here's that single sign-on authentication. If you go to use this and you are a USDA user, when you go to log in, it will take you to this eAuth page so you can log in with your USDA SSO account. Here's custom metadata. You'll see in order to fit it on, it's quite a bit. So apologies for it being quite small, but you can see really the importance of being able to configure this metadata for a catalog and repository like the USDA. There were quite specific needs, for example, to capture funding and group. They have bureau codes and program numbers and many internal agency things. There was also things that were quite specific to the discipline. So, for example, geospatial metadata or research area discipline methodology, how the data was collected. All of these need to be captured either for cataloging and harvesting and publishing to data.gov, or for reuse of the data, which is, of course, really the end goal is for someone to be able to find this data and reuse it. Funding metadata is also very important for tracking. And I know the USDA is leveraging this integration. So here's how this works. Using an integration with our sister company, Dimensions, a funding database. You can search in Figshare in Ag Data Commons for the grant title or grant awards supporting the research. And then when you save that, you'll see on the top right, that's what it looks like. You'll have the funding title and the funding agency, in this case, NIFA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And when you click Find Out More, it will actually take you to a page on Dimensions that tells you a little bit more about this grant or award, the funding source, the abstract, and so forth. And then, of course, critical to the workflow of Ag Data Commons is review by the NAL curation team. They do so much to maintain the catalog records and to maintain a high quality of metadata for discoverability and reuse of these data sets. So when you deposit something or create a catalog record, you do have their support. It is going through review when you submit it by the NAL metadata librarian team to be checked, to be enhanced, and then to be published publicly. And the last feature I'll highlight here is those streamlined workflows using the Figshare API. This is available at docs.figshare.com. And it's key for some of the workflows that USDA has implemented for Ag Data Commons, for catalog harvesting, for sending records to data.gov, for cloning similar records so that you can reduce the need for manual metadata creation, and for anyone to access these files and metadata in the future programmatically. So I'll say just a little bit about Figshare and FAIR data. This acronym came up at the start in Mark's talk, and you may be familiar, although you may not. So it stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And it's something that we should all strive for with our open data, and something that Figshare has strived to support for many years. The findable is certainly one of the places a repository infrastructure can excel the most. So we provide DOIs. In the case of Ag Data Commons, we're using the Ag Data Commons DataSite account to mint DOIs in their repository for new data sets. Also incorporating existing DOIs when they already exist so that you're not duplicating persistent identifiers. Metadata, I've just reviewed the importance of high quality metadata, and this makes all the research discoverable and trackable. Accessible, so we don't want paywalls. We want all this research to be as open as possible. Of course, this Ag Data Commons is for non-sensitive data, right, that can be released, that can be made fully public access. Metadata also plays a role in interoperability and linking digital objects. So our related materials linked in the metadata and also allowing multiple file types so that you can have the most useful file type, whether that's an open source file type or a file type that's used by a specific research area. And then reusable. Figshare allows for standard license types. Any license with a URL can be configured to be added to the repository. And then, of course, that metadata gives context about how the work can be reused. I wanted to highlight those persistent identifiers and some of these standards in particular, because they're very important for meeting the federal guidelines laid out by White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, and will very likely play quite a big role in the future public access policy for USDA. So I've alluded to DataCite DOIs. DataCite is global organization, global nonprofit that organizations join and allows them to mint DOIs. You may be familiar with these from publications, and they also apply to data sets and any research object that you wish to public to make it persistently available. And we work directly with DataCite, and many of our clients use their own DataCite accounts, as the USDA does, which allows them access to those records over time. ORCID for authors is important. This is your individual identifier as an author, and it's something federal agencies are requiring, as well as publishers and journals. It's a great way to make sure all of your research is credited to you. ROR is a newer persistent identifier. It's the Research Organization Registry, and it is used for author affiliation. So what organization, institution, whether that's the NIH or a college or university, what is your institution? And it's a single individual identifier for that organization. And then these also exist for funders. So then importantly, when you add funding via Dimensions, it is linking the funder ROR. And then lastly, some of those integrations with our sister companies, Dimensions and Altmetric. These allow for bringing in some of the metrics of reuse. So for data citations, we're looking across the full scholarly literature that's accessible to ReadCube through Dimensions, looking for the DOI of that object and counting citations. And Altmetrics tracks attention beyond the scholarly literature, blogs, Twitter posts, news stories, etc. So Figshare for US federal data. I think this is an important part of the USDA's use of Figshare, is having a larger federal community that's using Figshare, and that Figshare is paying attention to policy compliance, such as the OSTP desirable characteristics for data repositories for federally funded research. And so we do have a help page that outlines this. I won't go through it all in detail, but what's important is that we meet nearly all of these requirements, especially when Figshare is implemented at the organizational level, as it is for Ag Data Commons. That allows to have clear policies, for example, on risk management, to have curation and quality assurance done by a curation team. And then we provide the policy, the standards compliant infrastructure, the preservation, the persistent identifiers, the metadata, and so forth. So we support these, and we offer the flexibility to be a generalist repository, to work in combination with other resources that an agency may have or a research area may have. And we currently support repositories for NHLBI, Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute at NIH, Department of Homeland Security, the USDA, the EPA, and the Smithsonian. And then we, of course, host quite a bit of federally funded research on our free platforms for researchers on Figshare.com and on our larger data platform, Figshare Plus. I'll highlight a couple of examples from Figshare Plus here. So on the left, an NIH-funded data set that shows the importance of being able to visualize and being able to upload any file type. This is a neuroimaging study, but it used these videos of optic flow. And so here you can see they could share all the materials of their research that were important for reusing it or for someone else to replicate it or understand it. And then on the right, we have an NSF-funded collection of data sets. This actually includes 8 different data sets, and it shows the importance of being able to share data as well as software together. And this collection is actually given its own DOI as well. So someone can cite the collection of all 8 data sets. So collections allow grouping of research. Here's a snapshot of the EPA's repository that leverages Figshare. This is actually specifically for the Center for Computational Toxicology and Exposure. And they use this largely for presentation materials. So it's a different use case of Figshare repository, but they're using this to share posters and presentations primarily. And then here's the NHLBI repository, and they use this primarily for their intramural research program. And I grabbed a snapshot of a software record where actually you can preview a Jupyter notebook in the Figshare repository. So it's one of the ways to see the hierarchical grouping of materials. Okay. One other and federal program that I wanted to mention is our work with the NIH GRAY program. So NIH GRAY is the Generalist Repository Ecosystem Initiative, and this is sponsored by the NIH Office of Data Science Strategy. And it brings together 7 different generalist repositories, Figshare being one of them, a generalist repository being something that is not a discipline-specific repository or affiliated with a specific institution, but one that is available to any researcher across any discipline that will accept any type of data. These include the Harvard Dataverse Project, Dryad, Open Science Framework, Mendeley Data, Vivli, and Zenodo. And we are all working together to enhance standards for generalist repositories to make them more interoperable so that data shared in any one of these platforms, including the institutional platforms that these repositories power, such as Ag Data Commons, are all interoperable. Data is not siloed in one of them. We use consistent metadata and consistent metrics, and research can be found and tracked across them. We're also doing outreach and training. So this program started about 2.5 years ago. And so here's a snapshot of a few of the outputs we've created. One is a flowchart to help researchers select a generalist repository when they don't have another resource like the Ag Data Commons available, cataloging the use cases for these repositories, and a chart comparing the features of all of them. And then here's some of our outputs for standards. So we work directly with DataCite as part of GRAY. They're a partner in the program funded by NIH. And we're looking, all of these repositories already use DataCite to mint DOIs and use the DataCite schema for their metadata. So we're working on standardizing how we all do our metadata, the ontologies we use, the persistent identifiers we use to make it as interoperable as possible. And the same thing for metrics. So working with the Make Data Count initiative, working to standardize data citation best practices across repositories. And all of these improvements will, of course, trickle to all of the Figshare ecosystem and will be available in Ag Data Commons. So we're working on that interoperability through metadata, through PIDs, through metrics, through keeping up with the advancing best practices and standards in this area for research repositories. We're working on it. So here's an example of some of the product work we've done that has been partially funded by NIH GRAY. We have worked on the research organization registry, that ROR persistent identifier, and we're continuing to add that. It's available for funders and available at the organization level. We're working on adding it more for individual authors. We've updated our edit item page. We've updated some of our metadata for linking related materials. We've added some search functionality, and we're currently improving how you add the interface for adding funding to make it a bit more user-friendly. Here's an example of some of that work. So in Figshare, you can link to related materials, the paper that supports the data set, the software that's related to the data set, data in another repository that's related to it. And this is very important for linking together all these persistent identifiers and tracking their relationships. And so we've recently upgraded how this is done in our interface so that you can specify the relationship type between materials as well as the identifiers. Enhanced folder upload. This is great for complex hierarchical data, which I think is really often the standard these days, that you may have many files. They may be nested by experiment or site or methodology. And so now there is a way in the Figshare interface to upload these as a folder and preserve the file hierarchy structure, which is then browsable, and you can preview the files at each level of this hierarchy, which is a feature I'm really excited about having. And then funder faceted search. This is, of course, important for tracking research and finding research that was funded by specific agencies. And so we've added that. This will leverage ROAR in the future. And everything that is published in Figshare repositories can also be searched on Figshare.com, even if it's in an institutional Figshare instance. So that is one of the other places that we have broad discoverability, as well as searching in Dimensions or DataCite Commons or Google Dataset Search and so forth, that broad discoverability. I have just a couple more slides to wrap up here on Figshare and the future of USDA open data. I realize we're in Q4 of 2024 at this point, so we'll need to be updating our themes slide here soon. But I think these themes are all certainly going to continue into the new year. Our product team at Figshare is working on streamlining the researcher experience, the administrative experience of running a Figshare repository and reviewing data sets, and updating some of our core capabilities so that we can be a standards compliant repository that is continuing to evolve as new best practices for repositories emerge, whether those are decided through the generalist repository collaboration or hearing what our clients need and what our users need from their repository. So we have already now implemented these folder structures. We are updating our reviewer experience that will be coming out later this year. And this is just part of our roadmap, which is publicly available. And we're always looking for user feedback, and we work directly with our users to capture their needs. And one thing that you'll see here on the next is geospatial metadata, which is something we've been working particularly closely with the USDA on, because we know it's something their user community really relies on for data sets, and is also something the US federal community relies on. So this will be part of a larger metadata rescoping project that we're currently embarking on at Figshare. And so we, as a repository that has existed for 12 years, the use cases for it have grown over that period of time. And we're now looking back at our core metadata structures to begin to reshape them and to do some new evolution of them that will open up new capabilities to support things like item type based metadata. So you might even need different metadata for software versus data sets. And then to include standard metadata and to include new and emerging metadata standards, for example, that ROAR persistent identifier for affiliations and funders is one thing that we'll be doing as part of this. And then geospatial metadata is the other one. So we recognize the importance of this across our user community, including at USDA. We've been conducting a needs assessment to learn about the needs and workflows within the USDA community for geospatial metadata, which is currently captured in Ag Data Commons using GeoJSON quite a bit through the help of their expert curators. So we want to enhance how this geospatial metadata is added in the user interface, how it's displayed, perhaps considering if there would be a map, making sure that we're taking into account standards in the community that allow for this data to be searched and reused, and allow for easy editing and reuse of geospatial metadata. So that's something that will be coming in the next year or so at Figshare, and we look forward to continuing to work with USDA on their public access and Ag Data Commons. And that is all for today. I would be happy to take your questions. And I've also pointed you to resources from Ag Data Commons directly, as well as their team email address if you have any questions about the repository. Thank you so much.
Hi, Anna. I actually do have one question for you that I realized I should have asked before we even started. But will you be making these slides available after the presentation?
Yes, we would be happy to. I can provide you with a PDF and a link to it that you can send out with the recording.
All right. Thank you.
Yes. no need to frantically screenshot the slides, although perhaps that's already, it's too late. We will be happy to provide them.
There is one question in the chat that will probably require follow-up later on our end, but I will ask it anyway in case anyone on the call has an answer, because unfortunately genetics is 100% not my bailiwick. For whole genome examples, is there guidance for what goes to Ag Data Commons versus NCBI or both? And is there an easy way to port from one to the other? And if anyone on the call has an answer, you can put up your hand. Otherwise, Andrew, we will follow up with you via email.
It's a very good question.
Okay, well, it looks like we will definitely need to follow up with you, Andrew, on that one. Okay, and I am not seeing anything else in the chat that has not been answered. So we do have like 4 or 5 minutes. If anyone has a question, you can put your hand up and ask it in person or verbally. Oh, okay. Is that Tannerson? I'm sorry.
Tanner, yes, that's
Tanner.
fine.
Okay.
Yeah, my question is about actually related to genome and all genome data as well. So raw versus processed data. So raw data can be huge, right? And there are certain databases that you can deposit your data, like genomic reads. But what's the policy here actually for other types of data? We have lots of raw data in USDA. Thanks.
I can just answer from experience. This might not be, I'm not speaking on behalf of Ag Data Commons, but the general rule we tend to see is if you're going to publish an academic paper, what is the data associated with that needed to reproduce the findings? So it's usually the process data at that stage. And going back to the question about the different types of data, if there are subject-specific repositories that are usually for very niche types of content, and often that is the place for very niche types of content. And this is a broader remit. But yeah, the infrastructure is there to support very large files if you think that the very large file is what is needed to reproduce the paper. Obviously, you can publish data not associated with the paper as well. And then it's a personal choice.
Thanks.
I think you guys have done a great job on this. Compared to when I used this years ago, it's really expanded, and I think it's way more useful now. And really thanks a lot for all the efforts on it. And I'm sort of looking forward to trying it again.
That's great to hear.
Hi, Michael and the team. I see there's a question from Ralph Arnold about how this work with the existing geospatial data catalogs like geodata. And we do use the geodata, which includes the ISO 19113 view of the metadata. And that's a requirement for the Geospatial Data Act. So we can, if it's already in there in geodata, we can just link to the ISO file, XML file, or we can create the geodata record and use that same XML file as well for the metadata.
Thanks for that. I appreciate the complexity of the geospatial use cases and the policy landscape there.
So we have a direct connection with geodata.
Nice. Great. Michael, is there anything else?
I am not seeing anything else in the chat, and it is 1 o'clock now, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I will just thank everyone for coming, and especially thank Anna and Mark for presenting today. It was a fantastic presentation. And like I said, we will be sharing the slides and the recording later. If you have any questions, specific questions regarding data submission or Ag Data Commons, you can email the data curation team, and I will throw the email into the chat really quickly. And otherwise, I guess that I will just again thank everyone for coming and hope to receive your data submissions. All right, well, have a good day, everyone.
Happy data sharing. Thank you.
USDA is an equal opportunity provider, employer, and lender.